Hey everyone, welcome to our next session here. That being session one from Unit 2. But of course, we are going to Genesis chapter 12. And with this, I'm giving you the concept of a new king priest to begin the unification of humanity to Yahweh. As we ended last session, that's exactly what we're focusing on here, is how God is responding now, even though there is some generational time that's passed between the days of the dispersion at Babel until God calls Abram. It's important for us to get that, even though it seems like these stories are just rapid fire sequence right after one another, because there's now been enough time to allow civilization to flourish. And there is actually a Chaldean, Babylonian culture that's developed there that's different from that of the Sumerians and the Akkadians and various other kingdoms and people groups that share similar language groups and whatnot, but also different customs, maybe the same pantheons of gods, but they are different kingdoms ruled under different kings in the time that's intervened here. So while God has allowed time to pass, he's starting this process all over again with an idol worshiper in the person of Abram. So what I'm doing here, and this is going to set us up for the next lesson as well, is juxtaposing Abram on the far right of the screen to the figures who've come before him in Adam and Noah, and see how God is just continuing on the concept of the experiment and the covenant that he started with those men. Because as you see here in Genesis 1 and 9, the same words being given here between Adam and Noah, be fruitful, multiply. And then God says something very similar when he calls Abram out. Even though there may have been a relationship between God and Abram before this that we are not privy to know about, it just seems like God spontaneously speaks to Abram, and boom, he's now made aware of the fact there is one real God who has indeed formed the cosmos, and he is now calling Abram into covenant relationship with himself. But there may have been a pretext for that. But again, important for us to understand here that yes, it is noted later on in the Torah that Abram was an idol worshiper, but for whatever reason, Yahweh chooses to covenant with this man. And when he tells him the blessing he chooses to give him, it's this: I will make you into a great nation. But now he's using the terminology of the preceding story, because those at the Tower of Babel site, which is where Abram grew up at, right? Ur of the Chaldeans. This is literally in the backyard of where the Babylonian ziggurat, the Tower of Babel itself, was built. So that being said, they wanted to become a people of the name, and yet God is saying, I'm going to give you a great name and make you into a great nation. Told Adam and Noah, fill the earth and multiply. And yet God is saying here, I want you to go. So literally leave this land and go fill the earth with your seed that will come after you, that I'm going to give you in this land that I will show you. In both Genesis 1 and 9, God blesses Adam and Eve, then he blesses Noah, and then God says directly to Abram, I will bless you. So there's no way we can ignore this, right? Now, there's a little bit of a gap here in what's not said to Adam that is shared between Noah and Abram, and even a little bit with Adam and Noah not passed on to Abram. And I think it's important to realize that here. So as we take a look here at the fact that Noah comes out of the ark, so Adam, even though he leaves the Garden of Eden, that there was some intentionality to that. He was supposed to leave at some point when he fills the garden, or maybe Adam never would have to leave the garden. Maybe Adam could always stay in the garden, and the image bearers that share his image after him, if he had remained obedient to Yahweh, ate of the tree of life and not of the knowledge of good and evil in the inappropriate time that he did, that they would have helped expand the garden, right? And then, of course, Adam would have been free to go outside the garden at some point, depending on what God told him. We don't have that story, but he is pushed out of the garden consequentially because of the events of Genesis 3, whereas Noah is told to come out of the ark because he can't stay there. And so, as he does, he is supposed to then execute the command of what God had intended for Adam to do, but Adam would have had eternity to do it had he ate of the tree of life. Now, an abbreviated lifespan that's going to become drastically shorter for every generation that follows after Noah. And Abram is now also, like Noah, sent out of the land, not cast, but sent out of the land to go somewhere else, to a land that God will show him, i.e., Canaan, to start this new Edenic project. Noah builds an altar to the Lord. So Abraham, as he goes on in his journeys, just about everywhere he stops, when he finally makes it into the land of Canaan, a few years later, after he was initially called and left, he stops and builds an altar unto the Lord. Now, when you go back over here, even though we're past Adam, we do see that there are clear connections between the Adam and Cain Abel story that we've already pointed out in previous lessons. So, building on that foundation, when Cain and Abel present an offering to the Lord, clearly we have Noah doing the same thing. And I'm just showing here that there's a concept of a passing down the line of this. And so with that, it connects back into this here. So what's the big takeaway here? When we stop and we read these verses, and there's not a lot to read here with respect to this, we have Abram receiving a call and a promise in the first three verses. And then with that, he gets up and he leaves. And then we see that there's a season there that spans for years when he stops in Haran of modern day Syria. And then as he stays there, he waits for his father to die. I don't mean he did that intentionally, but that's the very catalyst that then burgeons him on to leave that land and then finally go to Canaan where God had called him to. Now, he doesn't say Canaan directly in verses 1 through 3, but eventually we understand that to be the case as we work past that, right? So I say all that to just simply say that what we have here in these brief 9 verses are enough detail that shared between this account and the 2 preceding accounts of Genesis 1 and Genesis chapters 8 and 9 to see that Abram is a continuation of what was going on with Adam and Noah. Whereas some modes of interpreting scripture, such as dispensationalism, seems to draw very clear lines, separate out these concepts, such that Adam had a covenant, Noah had a covenant, now Abram has a covenant, and these covenants divide up time and history into various economies by which God dealt with people. What we see here is a rolling forward of one covenant that connects all of it together. It forms more or less the basis of what is often referred to as covenant theology. I don't mean to bring that up in some controversial way, and you might not even realize there's a difference between the two, or maybe even what some of those terms mean. I would encourage you to do a little digging yourself to study that out. But it's important for us to pick up on these linking aspects to these stories, or else we will find ourselves missing some very important connections that Moses wants us to understand so that we appreciate the significance of why God's doing what he is with Abram. So hopefully that was helpful, and I encourage you to come back for our next session where we will build further on this.